If you're trying to decide between the SHRM-CP and SHRM-SCP, you're probably asking the same question almost everyone asks first. Which one is harder? That's a normal question, but it is not the question that helps you choose the right exam. The better question is this: what level of judgment does your role require right now? Operational judgment or strategic governance level judgment? Because if you choose the wrong exam, you can spend months preparing for a test that does not match how your work is actually performed.
That is the real issue. The SHRM-CP and the SHRM-SCP are not simply two versions of the same exam, with one set at a higher difficulty. They're designed to assess different levels of HR practice.
And that distinction matters even more now because SHRM updated the BASK framework for 2026. So let's cover all three: the real difference between CP and SCP, what actually changed in the 2026 BASK, and what that means for how you prepare. Let's start with the core distinction. In plain English, where does the CP sit and where does the SCP sit?
The SHRM-CP aligns with operational HR practice. That means policy application, day-to-day HR support, employee relations handling, process execution, and case-level decisions. The SHRM-SCP aligns with strategic HR practice. That means enterprise judgment, policy design, executive advising, long-range workforce decisions, and risk-bearing decisions that shape how the organization operates.
So the difference is not just title. It is not coordinator versus director. It is not junior versus senior. It is the scope of judgment.
Exactly. At the CP level, the exam is asking whether you can make sound HR decisions inside an established framework. At the SCP level, the exam is asking whether you can make and defend decisions when the framework itself may need to be interpreted, adapted, or reshaped in light of organizational risk.
That is a much stronger distinction than most people hear. The CP is closer to execution. The SCP is closer to governance.
That is the language I would use. The SHRM-CP measures operational judgment. The SHRM-SCP measures strategic judgment under ambiguity.
And that is why someone can be highly competent in HR and still prepare for the wrong exam, because they may know HR very well, but still be preparing at the wrong level of decision-making.
Correct. The question is not only how much HR do you know, the question is at what level do you apply that knowledge?
Now let's bring in the 2026 BASK, because this is where the conversation becomes current. What actually changed?
The 2026 SHRM BASK sharpened the framework in ways that matter. The prior framework included 9 behavioral competencies, with inclusion and diversity and global mindset as 2 separate items. The 2026 update consolidated those, and that is not a minor edit. Change 1 is structural. SHRM now presents 8 behavioral competencies and 1 technical competency in the framework. Change 2 is a consolidation. SHRM combined inclusion and diversity and global mindset into a single behavioral competency called inclusive mindset. And change 3 is practical and exam relevant. The 2026 framework expands AI-related examples and expectations across both behavioral and technical content areas.
So this was not just cosmetic editing.
No, it was a meaningful update to how current HR practice is described. The framework was refined to better reflect what HR professionals are now expected to navigate: broader organizational complexity, more integrated decision environments, and increasing exposure to technology and AI in actual HR work.
And that last point matters because a lot of candidates are still studying with older mental models. They think they are preparing for a static exam blueprint when the real blueprint has moved.
That is exactly the risk. If your preparation materials, your assumptions, or even your self-assessment are anchored in an older understanding of the framework, you may misread both the exam fit question and the study strategy question.
So let's make this practical. What does the 2026 update mean for someone trying to decide between CP and SCP?
It means the distinction between operational application and strategic governance becomes even more important. The more clearly the framework defines competencies, the less room there is for vague self-labeling. You cannot simply say, "I'm ambitious, so I should take the SCP." You have to ask whether your work actually involves strategic-level HR judgment of the kind the framework describes.
That is such an important point, because people often choose the SCP aspirationally.
Yes, but aspiration is not the same as alignment. The SCP is not a reward for wanting to move up. It is intended for people whose work already operates at a strategic level, or who meet SHRM's stated pathway through prior certification and transition into strategic scope.
So the framework is doing the self-selection work for you if you are honest about where your work actually sits. Let's put both exams under the same real-world scenario. A business leader wants to terminate a high-performing employee quickly because team morale is slipping. Same facts. How does the CP lens approach it?
At the SHRM-CP level, the focus is immediate and procedural. Gather facts, review policy, assess documentation, check consistency, clarify whether the proposed action is supported and defensible in this specific case. The priority is sound process and case-level risk control.
And the SCP lens?
The SCP widens the frame. Now the question is not only whether the termination can be processed correctly, the question is, what does this decision produce across the organization? What precedent does it create? What message does it send about leadership standards? What legal, cultural, retention, and reputational risk does it introduce? Does the policy itself need to be revisited? Does leadership behavior need to be addressed upstream? That is strategic HR judgment.
So the CP says, how do we handle this correctly? The SCP asks, what is the most defensible path when the consequences extend beyond the case itself?
Exactly. And that is why preparation built only around definitions and recall will eventually break down. Especially at the senior level, the exam is not rewarding memorization alone. It's rewarding structured judgment.
And this is where most assessment preparation guidance gets weaker than it sounds. A lot of candidates are told to read more, memorize more, and drill more terms. But the exam is not just asking what HR knows, it's testing how HR thinks.
More specifically, it's testing how HR prioritizes under pressure, weighs competing risks, interprets ambiguity, and arrives at the most defensible decision. That is a different capability than recall.
Which is exactly why CriticalThink HR exists.
CriticalThink HR is not a traditional assessment preparation platform. It's a decision governance system built on the CriticalThink Advantage methodology. Every question shows you not just the best answer, but the full reasoning chain, why the strongest option holds under scrutiny, and exactly where the other options break down. The goal is not pattern recognition. It's the kind of structured judgment the exam is actually measuring.
That's the difference. Most platforms hand you an answer. CriticalThink HR builds the reasoning behind it.
And that matters beyond certification, because defensible judgment is not only how you pass an exam, it's how credibility is built in the profession. When the facts are incomplete, the risks are real, and the easiest answer is not necessarily the strongest one.
So here's the decision framework. If your work is primarily operational, policy application, case handling, employee support, day-to-day execution, the SHRM-CP is likely the better fit. If your work is strategic, enterprise judgment, policy development, leadership influence, long horizon planning, institutional risk, the SHRM-SCP is the stronger path.
And if you're preparing for either one, prepare for the level of judgment your role actually requires. Not just the content, not just the vocabulary, the judgment.
If you want to build that directly, start your free 3-day preview, no credit card required, 55 questions at no cost at CriticalThinkHR.com. You'll see decision governance training applied to 2026 aligned SHRM scenarios, and you'll understand what it means to prepare for the most defensible decision rather than the most familiar one.
Build governing judgment, not just test familiarity.
Go to CriticalThinkHR.com and start the 3-day preview.